Welcome to this edition of Strata Originals. It's kind of a special edition because, as you can see, Alan, my co-host, is also on this podcast with me. We hardly ever do that. As a matter of fact, I think we've never done that. But we have a very special guest today, Dr. Ken Druck. You'll learn directly from him a few strategies on overcoming fear and imposter syndrome. Would you say that when you're dealing with mass trauma, might even get a few tips on aging courageously and what is apparently or could be our best year ever? So, Alan, if you want to introduce Ken.
Well, that would take about an hour, but I'll give you the short strokes. You'll get to know Ken, and you can go to his website after to learn more. But Ken's a world leading psychologist and the best author of 5 books. He'll help us today understand the challenges and the opportunities we have to really be better versions of ourselves and to meet the what now moments in our lives. Dr. Ken, welcome to Strata Originals.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Leanne. I'm so happy to be with you. And just one quick correction. When people ask me what I do, I now tell them I'm a recovering psychologist.
Okay, well, let's get into that. I'd like to find out more about that. So let's get into the backstory, because at the end of the day, our job is to teach people. That's what we're here to do. So let's find out about your backstory. How did you get involved in this mission, ultimately to help and serve people through the toughest times in their lives?
You know, most of it has to do with having survived the toughest times in my own life. Anybody who tells you pulls a story from their head or out of thin air or from a great professor they had that's not grounded in what they've gone through, what they've experienced, their own organic resilience. I say organic resilience because synthetic resilience wears thin, and it even at times prolongs our suffering and our struggles. So for me, the struggles of my life, and recently I was thinking, I flashed back because sometimes we forget about our own history. There are things in our story, the storyline of what happened in our lives that we know and we feature and we anchor in, and it's a central organizing story of our life. But I had forgotten that my dad, at age 35, had a massive heart attack right in our front yard and almost passed. And the message was, don't upset your father because we could kill him. You'll lose your father. And I was thinking the other day about how did that help shape the way I approach conflict, the way I approach my own needs, and the tone in which I ask for those needs to be met. So anyhow, my backstory goes back to being a little boy who was named for his grandfather's brother, his Uncle Casil. Who was Uncle Casil? He was a prominent attorney in Austria and Poland, because the border of those places would switch every year, and who was one of the first prominent community leaders killed by Hitler and buried in a mass grave not far from Kyiv, where today people are being buried in mass graves because of Putin's action. So anyhow, my backstory goes back to being a second generation Holocaust survivor family, making an adjustment to being in this country and being the son of the dad who had to go out and, was trying so hard and had suffered rheumatic fever as a kid and suffered his first heart attack, but continued as a warrior to do well in his life and to provide for his family. The more recent version of that has to do with the fact that the most important thing that evolved in my life was being a father. I was raised by 2 daughters, and my oldest daughter, who was the other light of my life, at age 21 said, Dad, I know the world is bigger than California. and she was a part of, she had been voted into the President's Leadership Institute and was meeting world leaders and all that. And she said, I know the world is bigger. There's a great program that takes you around the world called Semester at Sea. Jenna went on Semester at Sea, and several months into that program died in a bus accident in India. So the backstory of my life and trying to help people rise up out of the ashes of a future that had been obliterated. Everything from that to situations where nobody dies, but we suffer living losses or unwelcome changes, challenges as the seasons of our lives evolve, as new opportunities arise. And we're suddenly, we've met the person of our dreams and we're going, I don't want to blow this. How do I meet this what now moment, this blessing? Or my company has exploded. I'm sitting in profitability that I never imagined would be possible. How do I manage the success and the blessings and the gifts of my life? And so it could be anything like that. So for me, showing up is showing up no matter what it is, whether we're facing opportunities, setbacks, losses, living losses, where such as a divorce or a down period of our lives, or we're really trying to manage the blessings, and in the deepest gratitude and honorability, we're trying to manage things so well.
Thank you.
Did you take what you knew from losing your daughter? Was that the reason you wrote that book? And then
Yeah,
you got known for that and helped people in 9/11 and some other mass.
well, Leanne, I was a lunatic before then. I got my doctorate somehow, some way in clinical psychology because I knew I love the challenge and what I learned from working with people and working with organizations. So I started doing that in the mid 70s. All my clients were leaders in business and government. And I would ask a lot of the CEOs that I was working with, would it be better if I called this coaching instead of therapy? Because you're asking me to come into your company, we're talking a lot about your leadership style and the strengths and as well as the limitations of it. And you're also applying this to your marriage and how you're parenting and all those things. Would it be better if we call this coaching? So I started doing something called executive coaching in the mid 1970s, which has, of course, become a massive industry. We now have thousands, tens of thousands of executive coaches. But I was doing that work, and my doctoral thesis was on the psychology of men. Women's centers and programs and books were going up like fast food restaurants in the 70s, right? And the early 80s. And I was saying to myself, what about us? What about us? Alan, what lurks in our hearts? What do we want? What is basic training showing us on the good side about being a man, but what's it also misleading us to a life where we're posing and posturing for something we're not? And we end up spending our lives feeling like imposters, that we're going to be found out and bearing insecurities. So I started doing workshops all over the world for men. And I wrote a book called The Secrets Men Keep and became Dr. Ken on Oprah. This is when Oprah was just starting. And I was on Donahue show. Some of the people listening might remember Phil Donahue and all the talk shows that were sprouting up all over the US. But I also started giving workshops around the world for groups of men. So there were YPO universities in Sydney, Australia, where I gathered with, the then wonderful people who are facing into these same kind of issues about who are we as men and how can we bring out the best in ourselves as men? How can we summon the courage and the integrity to stand tall and to be proud of who we are and not to have to feel like imposters, but I'm the real deal. You can trust me. I'm solid. I've done my inner work. I've done my homework. I've checked myself out. I'm humble. I apologize when I need to. I admit my part. I've thoroughly examine being on the solution side of things in the world. I'm not unconsciously part of the problem. And if I am, I find out quickly, and I have the kind of trusted friends and confidants who tell me, or fellow employees, or people on my board, or whoever. So I was doing this kind of work before the tragedy that took my daughter's life. As a matter of fact, my daughter, Jenna, who passed, used to join me on stage. We used to give a YPO program called the Parent Report Card. And we did that all over the world. We'd send out a report card to all the kids of YPOers to fill out on 25 measures of parent effectiveness. And they'd get back to us, and we'd ask several of them who were really very knowledgeable and very insightful. We'd ask them to join us on stage at a university, and they would. And we give a program with the kids telling the parents how they could bring up their grades. Here are 25 areas, mom and dad, talking to me about money, talking to me about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, talking to me about how to deal with conflict, talking to me about how to grow close to other people, how to really communicate, authentically and be a transparent individual, how to protect myself, and so on and so forth. So we were doing things like that in years before Jenna, who became a leader in her own life and started a leadership program that after she passed, we incorporated into a nonprofit foundation with her name on it. Those are the things we were doing beforehand. When she passed, a whole new world opened up to me. My life as I knew it had ended. Not only had my daughter's life been taken, but my life as I knew it was over. And I was grieving the loss of my own life as well as my daughter. And in that loss was the discovery of the part of me that was living on and the choices that were there for me. Do I make my pain the central organizing principle of my life? Do I make my love and my promise and commitment to honor my daughter in the way I lived out the rest of my days and what I did and how I recreated meaning, how I recreated hope and the energy to go on with life? And out of those things, I've written a bunch of books, including the last one, How We Go On, using self-compassion, courage, and gratitude on the path forward.
That's so deep and emotional. Now,
How we go on that's the what now moment. All of us and everybody we know is having a what now moment. I don't care what it's about. It could be, do I eat pancakes or waffles today? Or how do I approach a simple situation today? I start every one of my days on a kind of walking meditation. I have a great dirt trail out here, and I take the dog, and Lisette runs. Her knees can still run, and I do my brisk walk, and I ask myself at least 4 questions. First question: what's weighing today? What's weighing most heavily on my heart? Talk about what now moments. Yeah, what's weighing most heavily on my heart? Am I worried about one of my kids? Am I worried about what's happening in my organization? Am I thinking about the physical I took a couple of weeks ago and what came up? Am I worried about what's happening in the world, where things seem to be unraveling in so many ways? Second question I ask after I really have bared my soul about what's weighing most heavily on my heart is, what's making my heart sing today? What's making my heart sing? Oh, I'm going to see one of my grandkids later today. Or I'm just so happy to be alive. I don't have missiles coming in. I'm not in danger. The sun is shining today. I have a beautiful view from my house of nature's beauty. I'm so grateful for the beauty of nature. I'm so blessed to have a companion and a partner in my life. Even though we fight terribly sometimes, I'm so blessed to have a partner in my life who loves me so dearly. and has such a generous heart and who supports what I do. And, so what's making my heart sing could be anything. But today, what's making my heart sing? And it's such an important thing for all of us, because that what now moment could be, why am I denying so much of the joy and the joyfulness that I have in me? Why do I marginalize that and really spend time thinking about the heaviness and the to-do list and the pressures? Why do I live with my foot on my throat rather than my hand on my heart? Why do I put myself under this kind of pressure, impatience, self-condemnation, self-criticism? Sometimes I prosecute myself like a courtroom with only a prosecutor accruing evidence, without a defense attorney or judge or jury. Why do I spend so much time up here? And how come I don't catch myself up here and then bring it down to here, where I start treating myself with greater compassion and kindness and patience, support, encouragement? Tough love, but tough love born of kindness and respect and appreciation for the good things that I do in my life. So the third question I ask myself is the promise that I make to myself today, because all of us have an agenda with ourselves, don't we? We've all made promises, but promise that I'm going to keep today is what? It's like, okay, I'm not going to eat because Ben and Jerry love me unconditionally. I go to the freezer. They never say no. And usually about 8 o'clock at night, when I turn on the news or something, or a baseball game, or a recap of today's news, or Bloomberg, and I'm not going to eat ice cream or anything after 6 o'clock tonight, because I don't like carrying this extra weight. My knees don't like it. My heart doesn't like it. So the promise that I make to myself today and that I'm going to keep, whatever that is, maybe it's to apologize to somebody. It's not to be so sensitive and take things so personally, because sometimes I take things too damn personally. I lighten up. Come on, don't take everything so personal. So that might be the promise. And the last thing, possibly the last thing, is I'm swelling up with gratitude for what today? If I allow it, my heart will swell up with gratitude for what today? What am I grateful for today? Not the last 10 years or the future or whatever, but today, what am I grateful for? And I might throw in an extra question about, something about the opportunity to lighten my heart and to let go of something today is what? What could I let go of a little bit more? My fear about something, the degree to which maybe I'm carrying a grudge towards somebody. It could be anything, letting go of doubt or self-criticism that I've been beating the crap out of myself for something that happened last week. Isn't it time to lighten up and let go a little bit? So for me, clearing the path forward every day starts with that brisk walk that I take and asking myself questions and clearing the path forward in my life. And a lot of people I've shared that with like that, especially the part about catching myself. I'm starting to catch myself. I never knew how much self-criticism and condemnation I use in my daily. I didn't even know I was talking to myself that way until I realized it. And then I realized the opportunity that it changes everything when I put my hand of kindness on my heart. And I take that deep breath and I stop beating myself up and I start talking to myself with respect and understanding, forgiveness, kindness. Changes everything. And then, by the way, when we do that, guess how we treat other people differently? Because when we're doing this, what do? We project it onto other people. What are you doing? How come you haven't done that? We're full of criticism and condemnation, and I got you. I'm catching people, doing the wrong thing.
That everybody processes differently, and they have to get to a place before they can start to,
Yes.
yeah.
The worst thing in the world we can do is to give unsolicited advice, to invoke cliches. You know, at the Jenna Druck Foundation that I talked about earlier, that I started for my daughter, we had the two programs, the Girls Leadership Program my daughter started, and the Families Helping Families program for families who had also lost a child, and which later became anybody who's lost anybody they love. And what we would teach people, we had something up on the wall, the 10 stupidest things people said to me after I suffered a loss. You know, oh, don't worry, they're in a better place. Everything works out for the best. You know, and so out of that, I formed a list, which people can find in my How We Go On book, called The Do's and Don'ts of Grief Support, which you never say to somebody who suffered a loss. And it could be a loss that they're going through a divorce. It could be a loss of something that's happening in their organization, or an employee who's left. It could be any kind of a loss or a setback. People don't want spin. They don't want your psychological spin. You know, they don't want your stupid questions, excuse me. You know, like the question I get asked, do you have any other children? And it's like, oh my God, I have another one at home. Why am I so sad? You know, all these years I've been this sad. I wake up crying. Why am I so sad? I've got another one at home. You know, so people don't know because they're not grief literate. They don't know what it means to provide support. What makes people feel less alone. Because when somebody's suffering this way, the worst thing they feel, the secondary thing they feel, and the pain, the secondary pain, they've suffered a loss, that's pain itself. But the secondary pain is that they feel utterly alone. Like, isn't there one person in the world who has a clue what I'm going through? Who'd be willing to ask me a question or listen or help me think about what my options are for moving forward without rushing me? So we have all these hidden messages that are embedded and disguised as questions, you know, and we need to catch ourselves. It's like, oh my God, you know, I just asked, you know, Leanne, has your hair always been blonde? That's not a question. That's not a question. It's a message. I mean, I love your hair, by the way. I think it's
And mine, you're not commenting on my beautiful gray?
Alan, you're graying like a fox.
Oh,
You're so
oh.
handsome. You
Never
know.
had any gray hair until he started Big Business Partners with me.
Ken, that's the sixth book for you. We interview both of us on, that'll be a whole other thing. So
No, or
So
the
anyhow,
famous question that I always love is, if you lose a parent, how old
yes. How
how
old were
old
they? How were they? That's a beautiful example. How old were they? Because I'd like to make it okay.
Yeah.
Grief is too messy. Let's clean it up a little bit. How old were they?
Yeah.
How did they die? You know, they want to clean it up rather than, you know, I'm so sorry.
listen,
I'm so sorry. Knowing how close you were with your mom or your dad, because I've been listening, I've gotten to know how close you are.
Do you
I can't.
find religion and spirituality play a role in healing as well?
They can, and they can also play a role in delaying and denying healing. When people use, you know, after 9/11, I helped coordinate bereavement after 9/11, and I would sit in support groups, 45 people crowded into a room who just watched somebody they love be incinerated, or, you know, perhaps somebody that they love made it out. And I'd sit in a room like that, and a woman would say, much as we heard a national leader say the other day, you know, God spared me. I'm on God's good list because he spared my son. And the woman sitting next to her in that support group is saying, Oh, my son was chopped liver.
Hmm.
My son was disposable. But God shine their light on you. So I think when we invoke ideas that we have, because we're responsible for constructing our idea of any kind of a higher power, of gravity, of any force that's bigger than us that we believe is a ruling factor in the way the world works, in what happens when we die, in what helped create the miracle of this life. When we share those attributions arrogantly as the truth, as the ultimate truth, rather than saying, what gives me hope or gives me faith is to think that I'll be with my daughter again. Somehow, some way, I'll be reunited with my daughter. I say that to people. I don't say, here's what's true. You should believe it. I believe it. Here's the truth. And as soon as you embrace it, you'll start healing and you'll heal better. So I think the way we show up, religion and drawing faith is a beautiful thing. But faith is faith. It's not 100% certainty. And if we humble ourselves to share our faith rather than proselytizing it as the 100% certain truth, then faith becomes an asset to us, to other people. But when we invoke it as a spin, and it's the same thing with psychology, when we pretend that there's a psychological truth. When I said I was a recovering psychologist, it's because I don't ascribe to everything that's said in the diagnostic and statistical manual that pathologizes grief and loss. That for me, crying and grieving is as natural as bleeding when you're cut. It's not a psychiatric disorder. And trauma is the same thing. It's not a disorder in all cases. It can become a disorder. Sorrow is not depression. Sorrow is, we took somebody all the way into our hearts. How could we not feel the deepest, most inescapable sorrow? And then we talk about we have words like closure. Do you have closure? It's like, are you kidding me? It's the most dangerous word in grief healing after a loss, because it gives people the feeling that they're failing. If I still, after all these years, find myself walking behind a young woman with the same hair as my daughter, or one of her friends calls me to tell me about her incredible position at a top company and her two children. And after, I love that her friend called me, but I feel tearful after the phone call, because I stop and I wonder, what would Jenna be doing? Would she have kids? What kind of a mom would she be? And I feel tearful. Is that pathology? Have I not grieved properly? Or do I just walk with a limp in my heart because I suffered an inconsolable, irreparable wound? Just like the people who come back from war zones in our service, they're so ashamed. And why is the suicide rate so high? Why do people come back and live a life of shame, embarrassed because they walk with a limp, or because they've been impaired in some way? When we've lived in war zones in our lives, and war zones are not only places where bullets are flying, but some of us have lived in marriages that were war zones that traumatized us, or work experiences or companies that were war zones. And the healing that we need to do requires people to be with us, listen to us, ask us open-ended questions that aren't messages disguised as questions. And in the company of trusted confidants and good listeners, and with our hands on our own hearts, showing ourselves patience and kindness, we heal organically from the inside out. We do heal. We are resilient. Healing is part of our DNA. It's in our DNA to go on and to live out the rest of our days and to recover some of our strengths and even newfound courage, newfound clarity, newfound faith and understanding. And that's how we clear the path forward for that to happen. Is everything. It defines the character of our lives, of the experiences we've gone through, of the quality of our relationships, and of the peace that we live with and our capacity to experience joy again.
Would you say that either hidden trauma or unhealed trauma that goes on for a long period of time would manifest as things like imposter syndrome or fear, discomfort? Like how do
Narcissism,
yeah.
arrogance. It can take the form of woundedness that manifests as deep-seated insecurities that people are riddled with. They live with their foot on their throat. They live with the fear that anything they do is they haven't earned or deserved. They're an imposter, and they maintain this hyper arrogant, grandiose, inflated sense of themselves, and learn, some people masterfully, how to manipulate people around them. They're con artists. They're masterful at manipulation, but it's deeply seated in a wound, in a deep wound. Perhaps the unmet needs of their childhood or a trauma that they suffered. And their indifference to the pain, their lack of compassion, and their indifference to the pain of other people is what creates corruption and greed and fills up our penitentiaries with people who are indifferent to, they don't think about the consequences of who's going to be hurt by what they're doing and how it's really going to affect other people's lives or their families or their children. There's an indifference, a callous indifference to the pain of other people, to what other people go through. Unfortunately, some of these people become great leaders. They run countries. They take over parts of the world. Their thinking becomes so attached, is so attractive and a catalyst to people's fears and sense of their own victimhood, that they're masterful in manipulating, in hypnotizing, in passing out the Kool-Aid to thousands, if not millions of people. Some of them run nations, some of them run companies, so people can become very powerful when their deepest wound manifests in that way. And some people become incapacitated completely. They become the antithesis of that. They are chronically find themselves to be and discover themselves to be unfit. They go from one loss to the next. They build up a storyline about themselves as failures. They suffer horribly. Some of them lapse into mental illness and chronic depression or crippling anxiety and become very dependent. Some of them, are their entire families, even as they get older, really are wrapped around them, around their survival and their sustenance. So what we do with our wounds and whether we take some degree of responsibility, because thankfully, even in neuropsychology and psychiatry are finding ways that we can push the reset button in our brain. We don't have to get caught in that loop over and over again for 10 and 20 and 30 years in a lifetime. We can break free. We can push that reset button. And we're learning more and more about how we can deal with trauma, how we can reprogram ourselves. Going from here down to here is a simple, such a practical, easy to follow exercise when we catch ourselves here. and we learn to talk to ourselves in a new way. So there are so many tools, abilities, and opportunities for us to heal. And it's our responsibility to invoke that four-letter word that men have especially have trouble using, the one that starts with the letter H. Help. It's the least utilized four-letter word in the male vocabulary.
I think that
Help.
people first have to realize, though, that there has been trauma, or if it's hidden, they have to know, even if we had a reset button, which would be awesome, by the way, if we had a reset button, they wouldn't know to hit it probably because they've lived like that for so long.
It takes tremendous courage, newfound courage for most people to be able to, rather than waiting until there's a full-blown crisis in which their pain will be revealed, or they're on the brink of suicide, or they're on the brink of destroying their marriage and throwing their family under the bus, or they're on the brink of making business decisions that are going to put them in harm's way, and they're going to be living at risk for decades to come.
Yeah.
Rather than doing that, summoning the courage to own up, to tell the truth, to find a judgment-free zone where they can tell somebody the truth and tell themselves the truth, and begin to think critically and honestly about how to help themselves clear the path forward and what they need to do to get the help they need to do that. Because often we don't do that unless there's some hand holding, unless we have a best friend who's a hero, or unless we wait until we've suffered a tragedy, or until we're on the brink of a horrific loss. We have to summon the courage to get on the opportunity curve. It's like when the doctor says, take 2 aspirins every 2 hours. You just had surgery. To get off the pain curve, get off the treachery curve, get on the opportunity curve that says, I can do something today to face into and meet this moment, this what now, this profound, life-changing, life-defining, character-defining moment in my life. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to summon the courage and the strength and the faith that I can prevail. And I'm going to go forward today, as hard as that is, as scary as that is, as long as I've resisted doing this. I'm going to have the conversations. Sometimes it's somebody else's well-being. It's an aging parent.
Yeah.
It's a brother who's addicted. It's a spouse who we've enabled, continues to hurt themselves. It's a child who really needs help, but who's kind of followed our lead in denying things. And we've saved 100 times, we've rescued, we've enabled. Sometimes it's having the conversation with somebody we love from a place of courage, but toned with love and support, and maybe even an apology. You know, the husband gave me a beautiful example, a couple that I've been working with. He went up to his wife and he said, I owe you an apology. That's the way he started the conversation. I owe you an apology. He said, what? What did you do? He says, you know what? The apology is that I haven't had the confidence in us. And I haven't really shown up to be able to bring up an issue that has been festering inside of me for a long time. And I've let it build up inside of me. I've built a case. I loop it in my mind. I watch it. I nurture it. I cultivate it, rather than trusting that you and I could talk it out. Because I love you. And I love us. And I want us to find a way through this. But I've been too scared, and I owe you an apology because I've been camping out in fear. And I think that's hurt us, and it's wasted time that we might have been able to spend doing something joyful, reconnecting, turning the pages of our lives as they change, as our kids get older. So it was a beautiful apology.
Yeah.
It's so powerful because you're really talking about the power of vulnerability in relationships and how we need to show up, as you said earlier. As you know, we worked with hundreds and hundreds of CEOs, and Leanne talked about how we see imposter syndrome. Why would anybody listen to me? Before I ask you this question, the thing that just hit me right between the eyes was the concept of self-awareness. Obviously, in our work, we have to start there, right? Where are you? How people see you? But generally, as I understood it, it was how I see myself coming across to others. But what you've added to the formula, it's also how I'm aware of how I'm treating myself, which is how I end up coming across to others. It's so counterintuitive, but the stories we tell ourselves are the stories we end up telling to others. And
It all starts.
And like, we don't learn that. Like, I consider myself a fairly well-rounded, knowledgeable. That just punched me right in the face and went, we know we call it self-talk, but you've now added it to that beautiful thing. And in the work that we do with our CEOs, how do we get them to that place? Like, that's where we'd love to be able to help us share how we can get them to a place of self-awareness of themselves and how they come across to others.
What a beautiful question. Beautiful question, Alan. Thank you. Honor them.
Honor them.
By honoring them, we honor the fact that you wouldn't have these defenses. You wouldn't have spent these years hiding, denying, repressing, disowning, defending yourself unless there was something very real that you felt you had to protect yourself from. So I want to honor you. I'm not going to put you in a courtroom with a prosecutor. I'm going to honor you. I'm going to put my hand on your heart and honor you. The second thing I'm going to do is ask for your permission to have this conversation. I'm speaking directly. The way I honor your defenses is to ask for permission to go beyond your defenses into uncharted territory where you're very vulnerable. And with the belief and the trust and the faith that the defenses that you are going to now learn, the kindness that you're now going to put into practice, the understanding and support, because you're going to change you're changing the chemistry of every cell in your being. But it's going to be a transition to go from here to here. And during that transition, where you're catching yourself and you're practicing talking to yourself this way, you're going to need license and permission and faith that this is all going in the right place. But I wouldn't dare come to this place with you. I feel honored to have been entrusted to even get this far. But I want your permission for us to venture into this, to spend some time. And in my practice, I don't do one-off meetings with people. I ask people, either you sign up for 4 or 5 meetings with me, or we don't play. I don't want to leave anybody on the operating table with an open wound or having given themselves permission without giving themselves the gift of continuity and of going through this transition. So it's then listening. The third step is to listen and to reflect. So what I hear you saying is that these defenses, these old defenses in you, this old way orientation to seeing the world and treating yourself and treating yourself as a suspect because that's what imposter syndrome is. It's perpetually treating yourself as a suspect. You're on trial forever. You never get declared as a whole person, as a fully evolved leader who's earned the trust and deserves the abundance that you have worked so hard for. So it's saying, it's establishing that as a goal. If the imposter issue is the issue, would you allow me to help you transition from being a suspect in your own mind and having to spend your life defending yourself from suspicion, from anything that even sounds like evidence that you aren't the real deal? Would you allow me to help you reach the goal of transitioning from that to this, to being a fully declared, honorable, deserving, trustworthy leader in your own way, in your own style? You may not be that person or that person. You can't be anybody else but yourself, your own best version of who you are as a leader, who's aspiring constantly for continuous improvement, continuous effectiveness, and strengthening and deepening. And eventually to lead, maybe to leave the stage, to leave a legacy of love as you go off stage. Because a lot of people are at that place in their lives. It's like, okay, I'm going to pull a Joe Biden.
I'm going to pull a Joe Biden.
I'm ready. I'm going to surrender control because it's time. So I've taken inventory, honest inventory, and I've listened to trusted confidants who love me, who supported me, and I'm going to pass the torch. It's called a succession plan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to invoke succession. How many people create succession plans that they procrastinate on? But I am going to take the steps necessary, and I'm going to leave a legacy of love and success rather than of chaos and denial and procrastination. So those are some of the things in my long-winded answer to your question about how the steps that I take and that I would recommend people take with themselves in transitioning from feeling like an imposter or not, for whatever reason, not feeling right or at peace or settled or justified. For something is stirring inside that you need to trust and listen to and give time to understand. And from that place of understanding and honest inventory to form action that you will be proud of to look back on, because it's based in your integrity. It's based in what you believe is best for the common good, for the entity called your company, for the entity called your family, for the entity called your primary relationship or your marriage, for your faith, your walk of faith. And you recognize that, and it's the right thing to do. It's just, you've investigated it. You're going to do the right thing. That's the path you're going to follow, and you're on your way.
Dr. Ken, is it a similar approach to fear and anxiety that what you're talking about with imposter syndrome? Because that is part of the underlying message when we talk to people is it's an unspoken thing, but it gets manifested in, oh, I'm not ready to do that. Like, is that a similar approach?
Yeah, it is. It is. There are two permissions that I really strongly encourage in any beginning discussion, or anybody who has even alluded to anxiety or depression or some unsettled part of their soul. Could even be their existential angst, because they it hit them right between the eyes after a physical that life is a least deal, that they're mortal. So whenever it is, the two permissions are, number one, I give myself permission not to know what to do. Sometimes we have got our foot on our throat. You don't know what to do? You haven't handled this? That's what the foot on the throat says. The hand on the heart says, how could you possibly know what to do? It's not like you've been here before doing this. Please give yourself time, patience, kindness, support. And the second thing, so the first thing is permission to not have the answers, to dance with your own unknowingness, to be patient with your unknowingness, because out of the unknowingness, with kindness, comes knowingness and clarity and direction and passion and newfound strength, mental strength and courage. The second thing that I ask people to give themselves permission, besides not knowing what to do, is acknowledging that we've done something for so long that we've been unaware of. My God, I just realized I've been doing this most of my adult life. But since I was a kid, I've been using these defenses because that was the best I could do. That was what was modeled for me. That's what society does. You know, people who get into trouble with substance and addiction issues, they live in a society that lubricates, that says there's no way to become a real man without alcohol in your hand, you know, and teaches women there's no way to become a real woman unless you perpetually look like you're 19 years old. It's your appearance. And those values are still part of the basic training of who we are as men and women. And God knows we could venture into the whole new subject, you know, the new expressions of gender, you know, as you talk about, you want something that's profoundly confusing and complicated and requires support, love, and understanding for somebody who's going through that. But I think the permission for us to realize what we've been doing and to humble ourselves and to say, my God, I've been doing that for a long time. I need to take ownership of the fact that that's the way I've trained myself and other people to act with me. As a matter of fact, I could probably think of, I used to do an exercise with companies I work with. I would, with executive management teams, I'd have a video in the room and I'd video their face. And then I'd move to the next person's face. And we'd sit and study and we would try to discern, what does that person's face saying to you? It's like, don't mess with me. I've got a don't mess with me face, or don't hurt me. Or I hope you're not going to bring any conflict up. I'm conflict avoidant. You know, you'll get into trouble for that. Don't say anything that's upsetting. What does our face say? What do our nonverbals convey of our messaging? So sometimes we discover it that way. And when we ask somebody a question, say, how approachable am I? Do you feel comfortable coming to me? We can ask our kids the same question. Would you feel comfortable coming to me and opening a conversation about what's happening in your life as a 16-year-old boy, 16-year-old girl? a 16-year-old kid.
Wow.
And, we're starting to ask kids, it's interesting, younger kids, even 18, 19, 20, how they feel about what's happening in the world politically. And we're finding out that they feel so discouraged by what's happening in the political world that they're teaching themselves not to care. They're cultivating indifference. So they're not going to vote. And the elections in our nations are being often determined by the fact that kids don't care. They're not engaged or involved, and they're not going to even vote. So the people that are going to vote are going to be a lot of the people have been radicalized or mobilized for the wrong reasons. Not people who are really, the consequence is going to be to their future, generations to come, of the quality of their lives and future and their children's lives. And how do we engage them is one of the questions we're asking now. How do we engage kids to think critically about what's happening and what people are saying and who they value as they listen to people who want their vote? And in companies, people who want, people who are going to be in a decision-making position to decide who the next executive is, or the board that's going to be in a position. How do we cultivate that kind of integrity?
Leanne, any final? I'd love to close with a couple of messages that I picked up from
Yeah.
Dr. Any final question for Dr. Ken, Leanne, from you?
No. Well,
Other
I
than
mean,
we
a
built-
million, but I
We
could
could,
go
let's
for
do part,
hours.
this is version 1, right? Of about 500 we could do with him. Here's a couple of things I think I think there's a PDF coming out of here that all the things that we should learn and listen, but a couple of key ones. Grief awareness, there's no timeline or formula. 4 questions to ask ourselves every single day. Be mindful when you're dealing with grief or anything that messages that are designed as they're disguised as questions. Listen, listen, listen. Ask for permission of yourself and others. And you didn't use this word, but everything came out of you was love. That's all we both felt today. And
the best way to love yourself is to catch this here.
Yeah.
And love, kindness, and patience with ourselves. That shows up as love, kindness, and patience to other people.
We had high expectations about this, and I can't say we've blown it out of the water, and this is amazing. And Dr. Ken, we're so happy to be your friend, and so happy that you're in our lives, because what you've done today, not only with the two of us, but with the thousands of people who will be listening, is we're going to change some lives. And that's the point of all of it. And so thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And thank you, Leanne, for creating this living room where something like this could happen. I'm honored to be with you, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Ken.
They will.
Thank you.